What constitutes a good adaptation? Is it the faithfulness to the source material, or taking that piece of media and creating something worth the medium that you are bringing it to? Adapting something into another form of entertainment is tricky, because you will never truly adapt that material one-to-one, because taking something and reshaping it into something else will always make it so that the new form is missing some of that charm, or perhaps depth, that the original source material has. That is why, in most cases, the best adaptations are ones that fully understand the source material and modify it to fit the medium in which the material will be brought to. Understanding the faults of the material and changing it to make a more complete package, or focusing on certain parts that are more intriguing and could make for a fresh take on the material. The topic of adaptation is very nuanced because it can be done incredibly well or abysmally poorly. Sherlock Holmes and Sherlock Holmes: A Game of Shadows are two vastly different approaches to the same source material. Source material being the characters by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, as Sherlock Holmes was a series of short stories that saw Holmes tackling numerous cases with Dr. Watson. You could theoretically adapt one of the short stories, which the second story does somewhat in a vague manner. However, these short stories are just that, short stories, and wouldn't make for a compelling narrative in the feature-length film. As such, for this adaptation of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's characters, the story would be entirely original, while making some elements from the short stories and integrating them in the story, while also creating original material to best fit the vision the writers and director had for this iteration of Sherlock Holmes. Let's talk about this new version of Doyle's characters that are found in the movie. The biggest change that the movies present us with is that Holmes and Watson still live together at the beginning of the first movie. In fact, Watson doesn't get married until the second movie. In the short stories, Watson was married and had long since moved out of Baker Street, but the movies use this as sort of conflict between Watson and Holmes, because Holmes doesn't want Watson to move out while Watson is set to progress his life past Baker Street by getting married and moving in with his wife. The only reason I could see this being a point of significance for the movies is because in the short stories, there wasn't much dynamic between Watson and Holmes. The only real relationship they had was a very strong friendship, and Watson was very inspired by Holmes. This simplicity could be because Doyle primarily used Watson as a narrator and wanted to keep the focus on Holmes by making their relationship simple, but I couldn't really say. What I can say is that this dynamic of Holmes wanting to make Watson stay in Baker Street instead of moving out and getting married is to give both characters, specifically Holmes, a more fulfilling character arc. This goes back into the short stories where Holmes did not have any real character development, save for the times that Watson, through the role of narrator, revealed more details about his character. In this case, for a movie, it is more compelling if your characters go through a change to give weight and significance to the picture. In this case, for the first movie, it is Holmes maturing and letting his friend live out his desire of marriage. Let me take a step back and describe these new characters. The titular character of Sherlock Holmes has gone from a more reserved character with some eccentric qualities to a borderline maniac personality, so far as such that he is seen drinking medicinal fluids on more than one occasion. The movie has also increased his knack for invention, as seen in the scenes where he is wearing urban camo and trying to invent a silencer for a revolver. But this version of Sherlock Holmes still retains his talents of disguising himself and portraying different people. Overall, this version of Holmes is an interesting interpretation and makes him more eccentric, because if you were to adapt him as he is in the short stories, I doubt that the audience would see him as eccentric. He was eccentric for the late 19th century, don't get me wrong. But today, he seems almost normal, a little quirky, but nothing out of the ordinary. Moving on to our favorite practitioner of the medicinal arts, Watson has become a more flawed character. This is a good thing because he seems more relatable than he was in the short stories, because Doyle never really gave Watson much negative aspects. In the movies, Watson likes to gamble, and he isn't afraid to straight up kill people as it's seen in the second film. However, he is quite the grumpy person, but I mean, to give the guy some credit, he has to live with this version of Holmes, which must have been a nightmare. Moving on to another major change that the movie does to the characters is Irene Adler. In the first short story, A Scandal in Bohemia, Irene Adler is an American who had a relationship with some aristocrat from Bohemia. However, she wasn't a world-class criminal as the movies portray her. She was simply an opera singer who only appeared once. The movie radically transforms her character and makes her have more affection towards Sherlock Holmes. In the short stories, it is hinted that maybe Holmes has some deeper feelings for Miss Adler, but it isn't delved into, nor is it mentioned after this short story, except in the rare time that Watson refers to Irene Adler as that woman, quote unquote. This is because in the short story that Adler appears in, Scandal in Bohemia, she is able to trick Holmes with a disguise of her own. And in the movie, it is stated that Miss Adler does in fact get the upper hand on Holmes on more than one occasion. However, the biggest change that results in major plot points for the movie is Irene Adler's love for Sherlock Holmes, and vice versa. These two characters have a strange interest in one another, but in the short story, Irene Adler gets married and leaves England, and that is how the case gets resolved. The only reason I see this change being made was to give Holmes even more human qualities such as love, but in the source material it's stated that he isn't really interested in that. I only bring this up because the love story between Irene Adler and Sherlock Holmes doesn't go anywhere, and it's almost as the story needed a female, which is true. Doyle's stories were a little bit of a sausage fest sometimes. A female companion and character was a good addition. On a positive note, Lestrade of Scotland Yard is still a bozo and incompetent as ever, which is a good thing. Every good protagonist needs an equally compelling antagonist to keep the narrative going. The movies have taken another liberty with this aspect of Sherlock Holmes stories because the antagonist is more involved and pronounced within the story, while in the short stories the main reason for the mystery was who committed the crime, or who was behind the crime. This would be a problem if it weren't for the intrigue that Lord Blackwood provides and the menacing nature of Professor Moriarty. These two movies are connected by Moriarty. He shows up in the first movie as a shadow plotting against Holmes and taking the role of an observer in this cat and mouse chase between Holmes and Blackwood. Blackwood makes for a compelling villain to Sherlock Holmes, even if the mystery is lessened because of his frequent appearances. Blackwood using tricks and chemistry to make it seem that he controls the dark arts, and he pretends to be resurrected in order to enact his plan of world domination, but it is revealed at the end that all of it was a carefully rehearsed play of sorts that made it seem that Blackwood was supernatural in nature. This isn't exactly realistic, but it does seem something that would be appropriate for the time period. Someone trying to make themselves seem out to be the Dark Lord of magic. In addition, it also bounces off Holmes well because Holmes is a logistical character that used logic and reasoning to find the answers to his case. Throughout the whole movie, there are shots used to indicate what Holmes is thinking, while trying to piece together the puzzle, and on subsequent watch-throughs, these brief frames give a lot of information that would be missed while first watching the movie. But the important thing is that the audience is given the same information as Holmes, so when the time comes to give his deductions, they feel believable and deserved, and not blatant ass-pulling from the writers nor keeping the audience purposely in the dark artificially increase the mystery of Lord Blackwood. Moriarty is a character created by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle to kill Sherlock Holmes. That was his whole purpose. Someone just as smart but infinitely more deadly. And in these movies, he is shown as a calculated and ruthless villain. He first appears in the movie, but he doesn't play the antagonist. Like I said, he is more of an observer, waiting for the right time to strike and take what he needs. Moriarty contracts the services of Irene Adler in order to manipulate Holmes, and it is here that we can see that the real villain of the first movie is Moriarty in the shadows. In the sequel, Moriarty is shown to us for the first time, and the first action he commits on screen is killing Irene Adler for her failure to manipulate Holmes. For an introduction to a villain, it is very well done because it shows that he is a genuine threat to the safety of our characters. Throughout the whole movie, he is constantly one step ahead of Holmes, to the point where Holmes completely fails to stop one of Moriarty's bombs. This not only grounds Holmes, showing that he can in fact mess up and isn't perfect, but shows that Moriarty is not messing around and can deceive the great detective. But wait, Moriarty's cruelty doesn't just stop at Holmes. Here are some things that he just does for fun. Not really, but you know. Bombing public places, manipulating anarchist groups, telling Rivage to take his own life, assassinating people to take their businesses, having a hitman clean up his loose ends, replacing a man's face in order to sneak in an assassin into a peace summit, attempting to murder a diplomat, creating artificial demand for war supplies, selling the quote-unquote bullets and bandages, and finally trying to throw Holmes into a waterfall. Moriarty is a very good character in this movie because he is a genuine threat and creates tension in the story with just his presence. All in all, I believe that Sherlock Holmes and Sherlock Holmes: A Game of Shadows are good movies that do the original source material justice in their own way. They could have created something that resembled the original more, but decided to take the source material and try to create something that was more entertaining in the modern age. Did some of the charm and sophistication of the original lose its way during that transition? Of course. but in the end, it created something that is worth watching and entertaining. And at the end of the day, movies are meant to be entertaining. That's pretty much it. That's all I have to say. Thank you for watching the video, and goodbye.